Policemen came to the door, knocked on the door. Neither of my parents were home at the time, and they had gotten reports of neglect and domestic violence. And so called up another one. We ended up with taking 2 police cruisers to a battered woman and children's shelter. The officers were quite kind. They helped us pack up a brown paper bag of clothes that we could take with us, and we went to a shelter, and we stayed there.
Welcome to Stories of Hope in Hard Times, the show that explores how people endure and even thrive in difficult times, all with God's help. I'm your host, Tamara K. Anderson. Join me on a journey to find inspiring stories of hope and wisdom learned in life's hardest moments.
Today, my guest was born in Honolulu, Hawaii. He grew up in an abusive home and then went into the foster care system where he was from age 6 until 18. He beat the stereotype and graduated from BYU with a degree in finance and then received 2 law degrees, both one from BYU and one from Northwestern. During his career, he specialized in intellectual property cases, where he has been recognized as one of the world's leading IP strategists. Recently, he quit his law practice so that he can spend his time with his wife and 5 children, who are his priority. I am happy to introduce Robert PK Mooney. Rob, are you ready to share your story of hope?
I am, Tamara.
Awesome. So you are one of the people who has defied the odds. You grew up in a crazy situation and you have totally turned that around. So let's talk about that journey. Why don't you first of all take us to your home life and then how you ended up in foster care?
Unfortunately, millions of kids in America have parents who don't provide for them, whether it's providing for their physical needs or their emotional or spiritual needs. And that was present pretty thoroughly in my home. My mother was very sick physically and emotionally and mentally. And I had a father who was very abusive. And so there was sexual abuse, physical abuse, and emotional abuse in the home. And it left some pretty significant scars. Scars on the inside and scars on the outside.
Right.
And so it was a rough go growing up. Nevertheless, we still had happiness and joy at times. It wasn't all pure darkness. I had 7 siblings. Both my parents had previous marriages, and each of them had children from a previous marriage. And together they had 7 of us that lived with them in Hawaii. My mother's 2 oldest children, they lived with us for most of growing up, but as soon as they were able to get away from the situation, they moved away. They moved to the mainland to go to college. And so it was me and my 6 full biological siblings living there. And not a lot to eat at times, not places to stay, and having to deal with the trauma that comes from abuse and neglect. That was a real thing. Thankfully, there was courageous people who let the police and social services know. One day, when I was 6 years old, policemen came to the door, knocked on the door. Neither of my parents were home at the time. And they had gotten reports of neglect and domestic violence. And so called up another one. We ended up with taking 2 police cruisers to a battered woman and children's shelter. The officers were quite kind. They helped us pack up a brown paper bag of clothes that we could take with us. And we went to a shelter, and we stayed there. My mother was contacted. She joined us at the shelter. However, within a short period of time, the social workers there recognized that she was not mentally and physically able to take care of these 7 children.
Right.
So we were put into state's custody, and that's when my journey in foster care began.
Wow. So as a young child, I'm sure that being ripped from your home and everything you knew, even though it was maybe not the most ideal situation, must have been awfully hard on you and on your siblings.
No, that's right. the first foster home was just an emergency placement. We got to find a place for these kids. Thankfully, my best friend, their family heard about it and they signed up to take me in. So I actually,
Really?
my first foster home was living with my best friend, which was really cool.
Yeah.
But I was not with my siblings. They searched. It took them a few weeks to find a home that would take 7 children.
Wow.
And they were successful in finding a home. Unfortunately, my older siblings, there's some pretty good trauma, and you are concerned about being taken away from your parents, even though the situation's bad, especially a mother who's not the principal perpetrator of the abuse and neglect.
Right.
And so when we were at the hospital getting shots, my older sister ran away.
Really?
And so she never made it to that foster home. And the day after we got there, my older brother ran away from that foster home. So it was me and my 4 younger siblings there. And I was at a new school. And I remember, so this is a couple weeks. I'm at my second home now, and a couple weeks at a school where there's a bully who was picking on me a lot. Home life is different. You've got different parents. They had children of their own, trying to deal with having 5 new kids in their home. Mm-hmm. And it was tough. And I remember just putting my head down on my desk and just closing my eyes and just thinking, all right, when I open my eyes, this is all just going to have been a dream.
Wow.
And so even when things are rough, you still want to be there.
Yeah.
You want to be with your brothers and sisters, and you still have love for the perpetrator, and so that's an interesting place to be.
Yeah. My goodness. So you went from foster care, home to home to home. I remember you telling me a story once about a marathon.
Yeah.
Why don't you tell me that story? Because I think it shows a little bit of the determination you had even as a young child. And I think this is what you've always had, that inner determination.
Yeah. So it's actually before we were in foster care. When I was 5 years old, we were living in a home on Oahu. Mm-hmm. And one Sunday morning, I see hundreds, thousands of people running, near our home. And I'm like, what are these people running from, And so I asked my father, who fancied himself something of a jogger. And he, of course, knew it was the Honolulu Marathon. Mm-hmm. That was a marathon that had been going on for about a decade at that point and was fairly popular and has become one of the largest marathons in the country. But yeah, he tells me it's a marathon, which means nothing to me as a 5-year-old. So I'm like, well, it's a marathon. It's a race. Oh, all right. I get races. It's 26.2 miles. No idea what that means. Mm-hmm. It's long. Okay, I get that. But I don't know that I had a full conception of what a mile was, let alone 26.2 miles. And,
right.
and so my 5-year-old response was, I can do that. Anyway, so I was like, I'm going to do that. When's the next one? It's in a year. All right. I had seen Sylvester Stallone's Rocky, and I knew I'd have to train. And so I started training. I convinced my older brother and sister to run with me. Huh. So my older brother, 2 years older than me, and then my sister, almost another 2 years, not quite, older than him. And so, what did you do in the early 80s for training? You did push-ups, you did sit-ups, and we ran. And where we were living was kind of the base of a hill mountain area near a place called Hawaii Kai. And so we ran up the hill and then ran back down. It was about 1.5 miles each way. Mm-hmm. And so we'd run 3 miles a day. And that was our training regimen. And I somehow got in my head that, when you're about to finish a race, you got to sprint. That might have been from a Rocky movie as well. I don't know. But that's what we did. No, seriously, we would see the finish line and then we would just take off, So the finish line being, all right, we're near our house and we just take off. I understand I'm 5, my brother's 7, my sister's 9. I'd lose every time. But it's okay. That's what we did to train. And at first, my father came with us. He was, I probably thought it was cute. Oh, yeah, these kids want to be like Dad, the jogger or whatever. And I don't know. And so he did it, but he had issues and he dropped out pretty quickly off doing, the things that he was doing. But we kept going at it. And sometimes my mother would drive a station wagon next to us, especially when we moved. We didn't end up staying there, but we continued to keep working. And my mom would drive a station wagon, by us to make sure that we were, still alive. Go out about a mile and a half, and we'd run back sprinting at the end. Sometimes my brothers and sisters didn't want to go, but I just would kept doing it. I just wanted to do it.
That's awesome.
So a few months beforehand, my mother signed us up. And the night before the race, so it's held in December, the first Sunday in December. And, my mom doesn't come home the night before, which was terrifying to me because she was the emotional support at home, and she disappears, which sometimes she would go places, but sometimes she wouldn't because she was frail, and her health wouldn't let her. And so this night it gets dark. She's not home. An hour later, she's still not home. And finally, it was really late. She shows up, and where she was is she thought that she would make uniforms for us. And so she bought white shirts and then just got kind of puffy iron-on letters that said Mooney Bunch across these white shirts. And we had matching red runner shorts, short shorts, with the white stripes down the side with matching white tube socks with red stripes on top. So we had uniforms to go run in.
Oh,
cute. And so then the next morning, crazy early, we went down to downtown. We had to park a decent ways away because there was a decent amount of cars parked everywhere.
Sure.
The race started well before sunrise, and hitchhiked to the starting line. There were some people going by, and we got a ride and got in the midst of the starting line. And gun went off, megaphone announced the start of the race, and it was just packed in with tons and tons of people. And here I am. I'm 6 at this point. I've turned 6, and everyone's huge. There's giants all around me. And so it starts going very, very slowly at first because there's so many people. You're kind of just packed in there like sardines. Yeah. And it takes a while, but eventually you get a little bit of space. And we get going, and I've got to take 2.5 steps for every one of my fathers. Mm-hmm. And he's running with us, right? He'd forgotten that we were running the race, and he gets this uniform. He's like, I guess we're doing this. And so anyway, we just started going, and 1 mile turned into 2. And then I maxed out at my 3 miles, and then just kept going. 10 miles, and then 11 and 12. My older brother and sister, ended up outpacing me. So my older sister, she was about 10, and my brother 8. So they outpaced. But my father, for all his shortcomings, he stayed back with his 6-year-old son. Make sure I was safe. He slowed his pace down, and we just kind of kept plodding along. I had never ran anywhere near that length ever before, and I just kept running. In years since, people have asked me, did you run the whole thing? I said, yeah. I ran the entire way. I didn't, however, run the entire time.
Right.
Because about mile 20 was when my body told me what my head wouldn't admit. And it's just like, just kid, you're done. And everything seized up. Everything seized up. We didn't have Gatorade back then. It had been invented, but it wasn't widespread.
Right.
Your hydration were water cups and pineapple juice. Dole was the sponsor of the race, and big Dole pineapple sponges that were in big, huge garbage cans filled with water. So you'd grab a cup, just drink it, throw it down, and then squeeze over. We didn't have electrolytes. We didn't have goo or any of these other things that people have who run now. And I was malnourished as it was.
Right.
But I made it 20 miles before my muscles just completely seized up, and the pain was immense. I'd never had cramps like that before. I didn't know what cramps were then. It's only after years later I was like, oh, I had really, really bad cramps, where it felt like I had these tennis balls just buried inside my hamstrings and the sides of my legs, and I just ate the pavement. Just seized up and just, went skinned my knees up and was just crying. It hurt so bad. And then, so by that time, so this is mile 20. So we're getting kind of close to the end.
Yeah, you are.
I mean, there's still 6 miles to go, twice as long as I'd ever run before, but it's kind of there. And And I'm not setting any speed records as a 6-year-old untrained athlete. And so by this time they've opened up the roads to let people, start using some of the roads and the cross streets and the like. And these guys in this old, brown beat up pickup truck, a couple locals, they see this little kid. It's like, oh, hey, you like a ride? Ask me if you need a ride. And before that had happened, my father had held me in his arms for about 20 minutes, just rubbing my legs out, moving my leg, bending my knee, because I couldn't move them on my own without immense pain, and I couldn't keep them still without immense pain. So he just kept rubbing them out and stretching them out and rubbing them out just to get the pain to go away until I could move them on my own. And it was about 20 minutes into this of him trying to get some movement and pain relief when these guys come up and ask if I want to ride. And he kind of stands up, my father does, and says, well, it's up to you, but you've done a good job. Let's go home. And I truly don't know this kid, but for whatever reason, my response was like no, I think I'll finish. So I stood up, kind of trembling a bit, and just kept running down the road. And, like I said, I don't know that kid, but I'm glad he did, because I've learned some great life lessons from that. When I got inside of the finish line, I did what I always did, and I started sprinting. My father he was left behind because he had been running with me and my siblings. He'd forgotten all about it, and so I just take off running. And as I come close to the finish line, believe it or not, I wasn't so slow that the crowds dispersed. Mm-hmm. There were lots of people around still, and people would see this little kid sprinting, and they were moved. They see, oh my gosh, he's got a number on his chest. He's one of the people running. And before I even got to the finish line, I had a couple of people run up to me with these massive flowered leis, not for a little kid. One of them had to be doubled up so they could get over my head. And I was just trying to finish a race. I'm like, what are you people doing? But apparently it's pretty easy for an adult to catch up to a 6-year-old trying to finish a marathon. And they caught up to me and put this lei on me as I'm trying to cross the finish line. And then I did. I crossed the finish line a few feet in front of my father and finished that. And again, I'm grateful. I'm grateful for the desire of that kid to do something that, he had no business doing, and I learned, and this was really helpful later on in overcoming hard things, is to know that you can do something, and you can do like these crazy things that people say you shouldn't be able to do.
Right.
There's a 6-year-old with no proper training, no proper gear, no proper nutrition, has no business running in Hawaii. In fact, some people have asked me, it's like, and is that why you were taken away? Was that the abuse that he let you do that? You could have died. No, that wasn't the abuse. But yeah, you can do something just so long as you don't know that you can't. And most of my career was doing things way too big for me, because I was too stupid, stubborn, or cocky to not understand that I couldn't do it. Then you go and do it, because it turns out you can do hard things.
Yeah.
Something else that was important there that I also learned is that you don't have to do it alone. My father, for all of his faults, and me and my siblings have suffered dreadfully because of his actions. But notwithstanding all of his faults, he held his son in his arms. He got it so he could run again.
Yeah.
And so there's going to be people along the way. They're going to be imperfect people. They may even be bad people. But there are going to be people along the way that will help us as we try to do these hard things. Yeah. And they don't have to be perfect to be able to help. And that's something that was really, really helpful for me to know. And it also helped me know that I can help other people, even though I'm not perfect as well.
That's powerful.
So anyway,
that's really
so that's the marathon story.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, and what a blessing to know that God uses imperfect people to help others.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
Wow. Powerful lessons from a 5 and 6-year-old boy.
Yeah, kind of crazy. So 2 months after that was when the police came.
Gotcha.
So that was in December of 1984, and then in February of 1985 is when the police came and started in foster care.
Right.
So yeah.
So you went to foster care and on the mainland?
No, this is in Hawaii.
Hawaii first.
Yep.
And several homes in foster care. What were some of the things that were going through your mind as a foster care child, besides that putting your head down on the desk and wishing that it would all just go back to normal?
Yeah.
Take us and explain to us so that we understand.
No, there was a very intense desire to be back with my family. And it just wasn't a possibility. My mother was again, I said, quite frail, and it turns out she was quite sick. She developed cancer just within a couple of years, and so her health declined, and our ability to see her declined. The possibility of being together as a family was dissipated fairly quickly. Mm-hmm. My father moved to the mainland, and then my mother did as well. She moved to Utah, and with the hopes that she could convince the state to transfer her children to Utah. She had family in Utah.
Oh, I see.
And so we,
at this point, you were still in Hawaii.
Correct. Yep, we were still in Hawaii, and just changing home. Sometimes I was with a sibling, sometimes not. My last home in Hawaii, I was with my older brother Michael.
Okay.
And then we just got the news a couple days before my birthday. Was told, we got good news and bad news. What's your good news? It's your birthday next week. That's the good news. What's the bad news? You're moving to Utah. Okay. So on my 8th birthday, we moved got on a plane, flew to Utah. And then my mother was hopeful that her family, I believe the reason she wanted them to move us to Utah was so that we could be close to her family. Mm-hmm. And maybe that they could be an influence. That didn't end up being so much the case that I think as she had hoped. But I think the desire is still there. Let's be together as a family until she got sick with the cancer. We found out. I didn't find out that she had cancer until we were already in Utah.
But did she already know that? I
believe that she did. I don't know that for sure, but I believe that she did. We came in September, and I think she started her treatment in January or so, and then she died in April. So they were in the process. It's a really unique situation. Hawaii has jurisdiction over these kids. You're living in Utah. Mm-hmm. So what do? Everyone, unification is always the goal, but it's got to be responsible unification. And so my parents, the state didn't know this at the time, but they divorced. Oh. But at this point they were living together, divorced. But anyway, they decided we're going to send the kids back one at a time.
Back to Hawaii? No,
back to live with them.
Oh.
And they were living together in Utah.
I see.
So let's do this reunification. We'll do it one at a time to see if they're able to handle having these children. Right. My mother's chemotherapy had ostensibly been successful, and so they put a plan to send them back. And I was the first to go back. Unfortunately, she developed pneumonia, and the week I went back is when she went back to the hospital, and then died after a very, very short stay in the hospital. I'm not sure how the decision went to, what made anyone think it'd be responsible to send 6 more children back to my father, who again was the principal perpetrator of the abuse. No real improvements on neglect side of things, and now without a mother. But they did. They sent us all back.
They did?
Yes.
Still one at a time?
No, all at the same time. So the plan was one at a time. Mm-hmm. But after she died, they're like, oh, you know what? He's good. We'll send them all back at the same time. Oh. And so suddenly we have 7 kids with this one guy, and it didn't work out very well. At the time, we were living close to where my mother's parents were. They lived in Provo, Utah, and we were close there. And then he moved us to Park City, but there wasn't able to take care of us. It took a few months, but social services were called in, and basically my mother's family was called and said, these children are getting shipped back to Hawaii. This isn't Utah's problem. So unless you guys can do something, they're all getting shipped out. So my mother's sister and her family came up and got us out of the home and worked with social services to get us back into foster care with a private social services acting as a liaison for Hawaii. And so now we end up in this very bizarre situation where you're Hawaiian foster children, or foster children under the jurisdiction of Hawaii, living in Utah with a private organization being a liaison. So it was a little bizarre. And then that was, we're back into foster care. And then the process began, for the termination of his rights, which happened a little while later. And so now the 7 children are available to be adopted. In the meantime, we're all in separate homes for the most part.
Right.
Ultimately, the 4 younger children were all adopted into 3 different homes. The younger girls were adopted together, and then each of the boys were adopted in different homes. And then me, my older brother, my older sister continued to move around. At that point, when his rights were terminated, it wasn't maybe our family's going to get back together. It's broken, and this is life. Your younger brothers and sisters are getting adopted into homes, and they're looking for a permanent place for you. But as you get older and you have, trauma baggage, that becomes harder and harder.
What was going through your mind at this time?
By the time I was in 5th grade, it was normal for me. It was the new normal, and it's what life was. Once my father's rights were terminated, my mother had died. Now this is now life. Things got a little messy when I was 13. I was living with a very, very cool couple, but they had their own marital issues. And as their marriage was falling apart, and I was, a child in their home, and I was actually the oldest. They had biological children. They were all younger than me. But they'd actually suggested that maybe it was to give a chance to reconnect with my biological father. It had been 4 years since I'd seen him, and I didn't know where he was. Turned out he was living several hundred miles away to the south, but that my older brother was actually living with him.
Really?
Yeah. So he had kind of run away from the system. He was one of those kids that were, you've maybe heard reports of kids being in the system that are just lost. They have no idea where they are. He was one of them, and I kind of became one of those as their marriage was falling apart, and I left to go live with him. Kind of unlawfully, I guess, as his rights were terminated and stuff, and went to go live with him in southern Utah, actually, just in a little town right next to Zion National Park, called Apple Valley. In our case, he was borrowing a trailer from somebody, and it was a nice trailer. But he'd remarried at that point, and she didn't live with us. She lived about 15, 20 miles away. And so he split his time there, and then up living with these 2 teenage boys, 14 and 16 years old. And it was tough there. Thankfully, he'd worked on his issues enough that he wasn't abusive, physically abusive, that is. And but he wasn't a big person. He wasn't a big man. I matured fairly quickly, physically speaking. And so by the time I was 14, I was about 5'11" at that point. My brother was 6 foot, 6'1" at 16. Both of us very physically active and quite strong. And so that physical abuse wasn't there. He'd gotten in touch with his Native American roots. He's a Native American by birth, and had kind of gotten in touch with Native American spirituality to kind of deal with his inner demons. And so while that part was better, it wasn't a great situation. He wasn't a great father, wasn't a great role model, and he wasn't a great teacher there. So it was just two traumatized boys raising themselves, not full Lord of the Flies or anything like that. But, and we cared about each other, very, very much. And, but it was a lot of times on our own, just out there in this trailer. We didn't have heat. We didn't have electricity. We didn't have telephones or anything like that. And frequently didn't have a lot of food. Thankfully, and, money for clothes weren't there or anything. And I'm growing. Thankfully, the kindness of others. One of my friends, supplied a lot of clothes for me. So I didn't have to deal with being made, fun of for having, pants that were 6 inches too short or whatever. So it was all right, but it wasn't great. But then there was a turning point that happened when I was living with him.
Why don't you tell us about that?
So I'd been there about 6 months, and we were driving in a borrowed car back to our borrowed trailer. And he said to me, he's like, Robert, I think it's time that we bring your younger brothers and sisters home. And I said, well, what did you say? We need to bring your brothers and sisters home.
And they'd already been adopted, right?
One had been adopted, and 2 were about to be adopted, and a third one was in the home where he would be adopted. So he's there with their permanent families. They have lives. They haven't seen him for years. Many of them, their only memories of him are terror.
Yeah.
And they have lives. They have some semblance of stability. They have a chance to forge a normal life. And what we had wasn't really a home more than it was a borrowed shelter.
Right.
And so in as nice of words as I could, I told him that I thought it was a bad idea. And that I'm sure came across as very disrespectful. And that escalated quickly into a bit of a confrontation. A lot of yelling, heated exchanges, got to the trailer. Went inside, continued inside the trailer, and it came to this point. I don't remember how it did, but finally he was trying to show how much improvement he'd made as a person. And so in this moment, he yells at me. He's like, why do you think I don't beat you and your brother anymore? And my response back was, because we're bigger than you. And
yeah, that's logical to a teenage boy, right?
Right. Now, so he was 5'9". I'm 5'11". Brother's 6'1". We were taller than he was. He's a full-grown man.
Right.
I was 14 years old. Right. So while I may have been taller than he was, I certainly wasn't brawn and thicker than he was. And so he essentially challenged me to make it physical. So he kind of called me on, and he knew that I had a history of fighting. And so I was like, all right, you know what? It'll probably feel pretty good. And so the natural response was, all right, that's fine. And as I got ready to take my first swing, a thought came through my mind, which was the first time that time had ever stood still for me. And that was just a thought came to my mind. It's like, you're about to hit your father. You don't have to. I felt like I had to. There was a time when I was in that first foster home where I told you, or that second foster home, where there was a bully. That bully one day was coming at me at the hall. He saw me. It was just the 2 of us. He saw me, and I had a pencil in my hand. He swung at me. I stepped back out of his swing, and as his arm came across my body, I stabbed him in the back.
I'm sure that went over really well.
Yeah, no, it was frowned upon. But people actually understood. They're like, oh, this kid's going through so much, right? But the reality, and maybe it was justified, but it wasn't conscious.
Right.
It was just what you did, right? Someone's attacking you, you attack back. Right. Someone's egging you on, you respond, right? And so it was the first time now, fast forward years later, where I realized I don't have to hit him. Right? He's being aggressive. I don't have to be aggressive back. I could hit him, or I could try to, get under his skin, or I could go back to my room at the back of the trailer, or I could turn around and walk away. It was the first time I realized that I had a choice.
Wow.
And so I turned around, walked out, went to the nearest friend who had a phone, half mile away or something like that. Called the police. They came and got me. And I was back in state's custody. And so that was a very important day for me.
Yeah.
It was the first time I realized, I get to choose. My grades before then, not good. I was not a stellar student. But I realized I get to choose. Literally overnight. My grades, first quarter, second quarter, third quarter, look like someone who's going to be, a high school dropout type person. Straight A's.
Really?
The next quarter. The only difference, I didn't get any smarter or anything like that. The only difference is I chose to do my stuff. All right, I have an assignment. All right, I'm going to do this. I'm going to turn it in, turn it on time, make sure it gets turned in at all, which wasn't what I would do beforehand. And because now I'm doing my assignments, I kind of understand the material. If I come to something that's hard, instead of just quitting or stopping and not caring, I go ask for help. And that was a conscious decision because I recognized it's like, all right, well, I'm going to have to provide for myself. This guy's not providing for me, and I'm going to go back in state's custody. The likelihood of finding a home of my own is a permanent home is not good. So it's going to be up to me. And about maybe 6 months later or so, I'm now living far away, and I'm actually living with my old best friend's family. So moved back to the neighborhood where I'd been in a couple different foster homes, and I'm now in a third foster home, which was actually, like my first foster home, my best friend's family, who had been a really good friend for the years I was in his neighborhood. And so I'm sitting there in their house, and they were great, so good, such good people, but it was like I was living in a friend's home. It wasn't your home.
Right.
It wasn't your family. And again, that's to take nothing from them because they were amazing in so many ways. But it was like you're living with a friend. And it just dawned on me. All right, you know what? The first family that you're likely to have is the family you make on your own. All right. So what am I going to need to do to make that family? And I decided then that I'd try to make myself in the kind of person that someone I'd want to marry would marry. I'd make myself the kind of person that would be the kind of dad that I'd want to have. And it was a choice. And it wouldn't have been possible if I hadn't had that split second moment where I understood for the first time, oh my goodness, I get to choose. I don't have to, because I've got a pencil in my hand and a kid's swinging at me. I don't have to stab him in the back. Because I'm completely angry and pissed off at this guy who's scarred my body.
Yeah,
I don't have to hit him. I can choose, and that made all the difference. I have a scar across my cheek. You see that line there?
Yeah,
that's from him. It's from him. Fit of rage when I was 5, kicking me down the hall, sliced my cheek open on something. Blood all over the place. That was 3-4 decades ago.
Right.
It's still there. And every time I shave, every time I look in the mirror, it could be a reminder of what was taken, the pain that was there, and how I was victimized as a child.
Right.
It could always be there for that. It's not. It really isn't.
How do you see it?
So anyway, at this point, no, it's just there. But yeah, it can be a good reminder that my kids aren't going to have that. And that's it's a constant way to remind me that I get to choose.
Right. We're going to take a quick break, but when we get back, we'll have Rob tell us a little bit about how his siblings have handled all of this. How many of you out there feel like your life is chaotic, crazy, and completely awful compared to the norm? What if I were to tell you that you are normal for you? I am so excited to announce that my book, Normal for Me by Tamara K. Anderson, is now available for purchase on Amazon. This book took me 10 years to write, and I share 20 years worth of lessons learned in my life detours, including being in a car accident and having 2 of my children diagnosed on the autism spectrum. In this book, I share the secrets of how I made it from despair to peace with God's help. I also include a bonus diagnosis survival guide at the very end of my Normal for Me book. The diagnosis survival guide includes 12 tips to survive and thrive in tough times. Wouldn't you like to know what those are? So what are you waiting for? Grab your copy of Normal for Me today on Amazon. And we're back. I am speaking with Robert PK Mooney about the amazing aha moments he had in the foster care system when he realized he had the right to choose his own future. Now, Rob, tell me a little bit about your other siblings who were in the foster care system. Was this as easy of a choice for them?
A few years ago, my younger siblings, they struggled as well, even though they were adopted. And my younger brother died just a couple of years ago from meth poisoning. He could never, even though he was the first one to get adopted, he could never break out and recognize that he gets to choose to be a victim or not. I took him to lunch about 4 years ago, and we were just talking, just catching up, meeting, and he moved back to Hawaii, and essentially disowned his adoptive family. And as we were at lunch, he was telling me about why he'd had so many problems with drugs and alcohol and other difficulties. And he was like, it's really because of the way my adopted father treated me, and kind of going off on all the stuff that is the reason why he had such substance abuse issues. And knowing what I know about our ability to choose, I just looked at him across the table for a while. And when he realized I wasn't saying anything, he looked at me, and suddenly he had, probably for the first time, a recognition that, and my choice is too. Yeah, you have to recognize that you get to choose. And unfortunately, he didn't internalize that.
Right.
So anyway, and it ultimately took his life.
So the choice then becomes, for people that have had an abusive upbringing, are you going to let that abusive upbringing rule your life and play the victim?
Correct.
Because there's plenty of reasons you can claim that. Or are you going to choose and say, I am the captain of my own destiny. I am going to change this.
Yeah.
Because I have the power to change it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think the greatest blessing that God has given me is the ability to choose. The second greatest blessing he gave me is the understanding that I get to choose. And so as hard as that year was when I was 14, and it was hard.
Yeah.
There's been so many paths that could have taken me, to my death or worse.
Right.
And, but even though that was really hard, it gave me that moment where I came to understand that I could choose. And that makes all the difference. If we let the abuse and the neglect and the hurt, the betrayal, continue to erode our spirits, then we allow those perpetrators to continue to victimize us. The reality is what I try to teach kids, kids who are from hard places. I try to help them understand, you've been victimized. You're not a victim. You get to choose that. You get to choose how you're going to respond to that. And it's a two-edged sword, right?
Yeah.
You become the master of your own destiny, but when you choose wrong, which you're going to do.
Yes.
Yeah, just because I understood at that point that I now get to choose does not mean my choices were great. All right. I made lots of boneheaded mistakes, and then those were mine.
Yes.
They weren't because I was abused as a child. They weren't because of whatever else the case may be. It was me.
Yeah.
I made those choices. And, but the great thing is, the third and overarching thing that God gave me is is a way to fix those times when I choose amiss, which I do all the time. But thankfully, there's that infinite love that allows me to make those things right.
Repentance.
That's what it's called.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah. So it sounds to me like your choices have helped you realize the power of both repentance and it's got to be forgiveness.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Because that forgiveness is key because it's a choice.
Yes, it is.
And it's key to not continuing to allow, not continuing to be a victim of other people's bad actions.
So let me ask you this. Have you forgiven your father?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. I had to do it twice.
Tell me about it.
Notwithstanding all this stuff, I still had this love and this connection for him, and this yearning to be there. And it's probably why my foster parents, when I was 13, suggested that we reconnect. Right? And so even when someone's cut your face open, they're still your dad, you know? And so there's that love there. But then, you know, things go sideways as a teenager. I came to recognize, listen, you got to let all that go. You got to let that go as part of, you know, this kind of a new understanding as an older teenager that I'm going to forge my own life. Yeah. Part of that's going to be forgiving them. And it wasn't that hard when I was mindful of it. It took prayer, and I asked for divine help. And it wasn't too hard. The second time was years later when I became a father. And there was a hurt kind of all over again because I've got this new son. And I recognized I would do anything for him.
Yeah.
And the thought came to me, is like, there's nothing anybody could do to keep me from the child. If, as he'd claimed for so long, you know, my children were wrongfully taken away. And that was kind of his marching, his battle cry. You know, my children were stolen from me. Let's just say that was the case. There'd be nothing to stop me from getting back. I would do anything I needed to have my children back with me, and to be that presence in their life. And so I felt kind of this new wave of abandonment, as it were. It was like, holy crap, this is so awesome. I couldn't imagine loving somebody so much. Oh, he didn't have that. And if he did, he was willing to walk away from it. And so there was like this new wave of hurt. But the same thing applied, right? You know, the same situation, like, you know, looking at the pain in the mirror, right? You recognize that it's there. You feel the pain, and then you choose to let it go. You choose to let it go. So anyway, yeah.
Did that happen? You prayed your way through that and gave it to God, or?
Yeah. So, yeah, I learned that what the Lord did for me wasn't just taking away my sins. He can heal my heart. So one of the frequent things that I've cried is that it's like, there's a hole in my heart. I just need you to fill it. And sometimes it takes time. And there's always an ache. You know, when I think of my sister who took her own life, there's an ache. When I think of my mother, there's an ache. It's still there, but it's healed. It's healed. And so that's what you do. You turn it over. You know, I don't want to feel these feelings, you know. I'd rather be filled with light. This feels dark. Take them back to the light. And it happens. It takes time, but it happens if you're willing to. So
perhaps your advice to people who are in a similar situation and struggling to forgive is give it to God and be patient as He helps you fill that hole. Yeah,
absolutely. Sometimes what's been filling the hole is the anger and the rage. It's part of what's keeping you whole. You think.
Yeah.
But what you really have is you have a void in your life, and you're filling it with that anger, with that hatred, with that hurt. And it turns out there's a master healer who, if you'll give it to him, he'll fill it up with love. It's possible. It's real.
Yeah. So just be patient.
Yeah.
Give God the time and allow him the ability to come in and heal you. Choose that, as you would say.
Absolutely. And then there will be times where your actions can be separate from your feelings, that can be separate from your thoughts, where you may feel a certain way, but you would recognize if I were to act in this way, it would be inconsistent with having forgiven somebody.
So act as if you have forgiven.
Absolutely.
Until it's complete.
Correct.
Ooh, that's a powerful bit of advice.
And that's a choice.
Yes, it is.
Even though in your heart you feel, I'd like to hurt this person, I'm gonna choose not to.
Right.
It's a choice. He gave you the power to choose.
Yeah.
And part of that is choosing to let him heal you.
Yeah.
Part of that is doing what he would have you do, even when you don't feel like it.
Right.
So.
Yeah. Wow. That's really. I love the act as if until you're completely healed, and it will happen. So maybe cling to that hope that someday your heart will be whole, and there will be love in those places where there's now darkness and pain.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. It's one of the great blessings of being a father, is that there are ample opportunities to fill your heart with love. And so I love being a dad, just because, for that reason, being a husband, being a father, you are given, it's like God's, architecture, his design for giving you opportunities to love, giving you opportunities to serve, giving you opportunities to grow. It's one of the great things about being a parent, that I'm grateful I have that blessing. My wife and I, we've got our 4 children, but we also have served as foster parents as well. So there's an infinite need for parents, and for someone who is, I'm inherently selfish. No, I am. But it reflects in altruistic acts because those bring me joy.
Right.
Right. The only truly altruistic person would be God.
Yeah.
He was God, but he still gave everything. He didn't have to. He had nothing to gain from that, but he did it anyway. Whereas me, I always have something to gain. It's completely wholesome, right? It's I gain this incredible feeling in my heart when I do this with my children, and I feel this closeness with my wife when I treat her with respect, and all these sorts of things. Someday, I hope I never get a terrible test where God's like, all right, well, Rob, I'm going to take away all those good feelings and we'll see if you still do the right thing. I hope that doesn't come, because I really do. I love being in a family.
Well, and it's amazing that I think looking back on that child who ran the marathon, it just goes to show that once you are fixed and determined to choose your own life, to choose to be different, there's nothing that's going to stop you. You are going to finish that race.
Yeah, from time to time. But there's been help. One of the things right now, I speak to kids that are in foster care to try, especially kids that are likely to age out.
Right.
Your adoptability kind of drops down. You hit 14, 15. It's hard to find a permanent home for those kids, and so states will frequently change the focus to transitioning to adult living.
Right.
And see what you can do to make a positive life. The statistics for those kids aren't good. And so one of the things that I try and tell these kids is, number one, you can do these hard things. And I use the marathon as an example of doing something ridiculously hard that you have no business doing, but you can still do it. Yeah. But I do point out that you don't have to do it alone. Normally, God sends angels in the form of people around us.
Yes, he does.
Imperfect people, but they're there. But even if they're not, and physically you're utterly alone, you're still got someone who's going to help you through. Yeah. And that's the Lord. And that's absolutely true.
Yeah. God's always there.
Yeah. I learned that from a friend, from a friend when I was living with my best friend, when I was 15. I was with a group of guys, and as guys do, from time to time, teenage guys, they were complaining about their families. Oh, I hate my mom. She's making me do this. Oh, yeah, my sister. Anyway, it ended up just being this big old gripe fest with my friends. And I was kind of silent through that.
Sure.
And I said to one, I was like, afterwards, just one-on-one, it really bugs me to hear you guys complain about your families. I'd really like one. And you guys treat them like they're garbage. And to his credit, he was participating in the family bash. He said to me, he's like, well, Rob, if you want a family, you can ask God. He can give you one. And I never thought of God as being a person who could provide a family. And so I went to my bed. I lived in the storage room of my friend's place. They had a bed, and I knelt down next to it in my spot, and just said a very simple prayer. God, Joe says that you can give me a family. If you can, I'd really like one. And the very, very, very next day, nothing happened. And the next day, nothing happened, and so on and so forth. And I kept asking. I kept just, all right, I can be patient. And a week is long for the 15-year-old. A couple months is even longer. But I continue to ask. Simple prayer. I'd like a family. And then my social worker calls me. And she's like, I think I've got a perfect home for you. And we go, and she picks me up and drives me to this place. Mm-hmm. And it was like this vision, dream come true. Mm. Tennis courts, swimming pools, big old mansion. I'm like, you're kidding me. Like, oh my gosh, this prayer stuff works really, really well. And I go and I meet these people, and they are dynamic and gregarious, and they have these older daughters, and they've got a son who's always wanted a big brother, and he was several years younger than me. And we just hit it off, and they wanted to make sure that I was the right fit for them to come to their home. And so we spent several weeks with me coming and visiting them, and they had boats. We went boating together.
You probably loved that.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, no, they had basketball courts. I mean, it was like this. Oh my goodness. I'm going to go live with, a family that has all of this, mm-hmm. and they're crazy cool, and they're just like me, and very gregarious and outgoing and athletic. I'm like, oh, this is amazing. And I was like, wow, prayer's absolutely amazing. I could get into this prayer thing. And then after a couple of weeks, they had me come over for just a kind of a family council, as it were. And I knew something was wrong because the kids were crying. And the mom and dad, they were very religious people. They said, Rob, we've been praying really hard about having you come live with us, and we love you, but it's not the right place. And so we're not going to have you come live here. And I was heartbroken. Before I left, the dad said, Rob, we truly love you. And it's kind of coming on the hollow ears, but we truly love you. And the only reason you're not coming here is because either you've got more to learn from your situation, or because the Lord has something better for you. And I went back to my bed in my buddy's home, quite confident there wasn't anything better, because this was really awesome. And I was a little bitter, actually. And so I realized, all right, that the home that I'm going to make is going to be my own home, and was fixed and determined that that's what it was going to be. So my caseworker, she was concerned now, the likelihood of finding a permanent home is now virtually gone. And she was like, well, you need to make sure that you're able to provide for yourself. And so she advised for me to do my junior year over the summer at the second, the alternative school. And so I did. So, all right, I'm going to go prepare for myself. And so I did my junior year over that summer, fixed and determined to make my family in the future. My social worker called me, and she said, Rob, there's a girl who was adopted when she was young, and she's having some troubles, identity issues, if you will. Would you be willing to come just talk to her and help lift her spirits? Yeah, sure, of course, I'll come talk to her. So I go to talk to her, and she was having troubles, but I didn't know that what was happening was that girl's family was kind of just checking me out incognito to see whether or not I should come live with them. And they decided that they did want me to come live with them. And so the summer before my senior year, I moved in with the place that my kids call Grandma and Grandpa now. And the amazing thing about my parents is that, unlike the other family who was so amazing and so much like me, my parents were soft-spoken. They were hard workers. They were more reserved, and they had qualities that I didn't have. Where I was weak, that was where their greatest strengths were. And even though I only lived with them for a year before I graduated from high school and went to college, they helped make me a complete person. And I was able to look back and think, the other family, they felt right to me. They appeared right to me, but God, He didn't want to answer my prayers the way I wanted to. He knew how to answer them perfectly. And so I was grateful for the fact that He showed me what I could have had, and then inspired a devoted devoted follower of Christ to say the words to me that Heavenly Father might have something better for me, so that when He did show it to me, I could recognize that in reality, He knew how to answer my prayers perfectly.
That's beautiful. So perhaps it's that lesson of patience again. And not just patience, but trusting that God can see that end outcome and that He has your best interest at heart.
Yeah.
He knew that this other family would be the perfect fit, in that they could probably help make you whole.
Yep, that's absolutely right. So, again, it was a great opportunity to be taught that, where, I came to learn that He's there. I'm grateful for a friend who gave me the idea. And then I'm grateful for the way it played out, so that I could learn that He's there. He answers prayers, and He answers them perfectly. It is in His own time.
Yes.
And it's in His own way. And over the years, I've come to trust that His own way is better than what I would have drawn up.
Yep. That's really awesome. So you have written a book for foster care children. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that? Yeah.
So, my focus in my education was being able to provide for my family.
Right.
I've had a career, a really successful career as a lawyer, and have done really well there. A lot of people go to law because they want to change the world. I didn't. I went to law as a means to be able to provide for my children and my wife. That was my focus. Now, definitely be able to do good along the way, and I feel like I've been able to do that. However, my career is so frequently taken away from my family.
Right.
And while I think I've been a really, really good husband and father, a lot of times I've had to do it from a distance because I've had to travel a lot. Well, over the years, people have heard my story, and people have told me in many different parts of the world and in many different places, "Oh my goodness, Rob, you have to write a book. You have to tell your story." And so I'd always planned on writing a book, not a memoir. to tell a life story, but something to help kids, these foster kids who are likely to age out.
Right.
Even though I moved in with this family when I was a senior, I was never adopted, aged out of the system. And I understand that the road is tough for these kids.
Yes. You lived it.
Yeah, that's right. So I wanted to write a book that would share some lessons,
yes,
and hopefully inspire these kids to help them recognize that they can choose to be successful. And that book's ready to come out. The title of the book is A Foster Kid's Road to Success.
Awesome.
And it's short, it's simple, it's intended to help these kids, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, maybe even kids who have aged out, who are trying to forge on their own, help them understand how they can choose to be successful.
Yeah.
Help them understand that they can do it. Whatever it is, you can do it.
Yeah.
And a little kid ran a marathon, you can do it.
Yes.
My hope for them is that it, quote unquote, it is that they can forge meaningful, deep family relationships. They can love, they can be loved.
Right.
They can need other people, and they can be needed by other people. I want them for them.
Yes.
But truthfully, whatever their it is, I want them to know they can do it.
Yeah.
And I want them to know that they can choose to do it and how to guard that choice. And so it's not long. It's short, just a few chapters. Pretty easy read. And I now go and I speak to groups of these kids who are likely to age out, foster kids in the system or who've recently left the system.
So is there a verse of scripture that's become meaningful to you?
Yeah. When you are all alone in a storage room, thinking that, there's nobody there, and you've been kind of cast away and forgotten, there's a scripture that can remind us that that's not true. The Lord tells us in Isaiah that he remembers us. He's not going to forget us. So much so that he's actually, graven us upon the palms of his hands. It's in Isaiah 49:16. So while we may feel forgotten, we're never alone.
That's beautiful. And that's brought you comfort and helped you make it through. Thank you for sharing that. If there is anyone that has just really resonated with this message, is there a way that they can find you on social media that you would like to share with us?
Yeah. I believe I'm on Instagram at Robert PK Mooney. And I think on Facebook, I think it's just Robert PK Mooney, is the way to find it. My website is www.robertpkmooney.com. That's P as in Paul, K as in kite, robertpkmooney.com. That's my website. So you can find out more information there.
And another really cool thing you can find on Rob's website is the ability to purchase one of these books for a foster care child. And this is an amazing service opportunity. So go to Rob's website, robertpkmooney.com.
I will put that information in the show notes so that if you do want to contact Rob, you can find that information in the show notes on my website. Thank you so much, Rob, for sharing your story of hope and for continuing to motivate others to also find that same hope.
Hey, thanks so much for listening to today's show. I know that there are many of you out there that are going through a hard time, and I hope you found things that have been useful today as you listen to the podcast. If you would like to access the show notes from today's podcast, visit my website. It is storiesofhopepodcast.com. That is where you'll find favorite quotes from today's episode and shareable memes. And those are fun because you can share them with your friends on social media. You will also find the links mentioned throughout today's episode so you don't have to remember what those were. And also all the tips that were shared. Sometimes tips are shared so much throughout an episode you forget. What were those great things? So go to the show notes, storiesofhopepodcast.com, to look up these fantastic resources. If someone kept coming to mind during today's episode, Perhaps that means that you should share this with them. Maybe there was a story shared or a tip that they really, really need to hear. So go ahead and share this episode with them. May God bless you, especially if you are struggling, with hope to carry on and with the strength to keep going when things get tough. Remember to walk with Christ, and He will help bear that burden. Above all else, remember, God loves you.